Yesterday at 3:55 a.m., the quiet skies over eastern Ukraine were interrupted by a coordinated strike. Ukrainian forces targeted what has been described as one of Russia's most ambitious recent military collaborations, a $1.6 billion drone alliance with China. For months, this partnership reportedly represented the Kremlin's effort to gain a new edge in the air. However, the operation left wreckage from dozens of advanced UAVs, indicating the initiative had suffered a major setback. This was not just a fight in the air, it was a geopolitical development. Ukraine's counter-drone operations effectively dismantled a key component of Russia's evolving war strategy, one heavily dependent on Chinese technology, logistics, and quiet financial backing. The destruction marked a significant failure for what Moscow and Beijing had promoted as a technological bridge, a collaboration intended to offset Western sanctions and support Russia's defense industry. For China, this alliance was reportedly intended as a low-risk experiment, a testbed to observe how its drones and AI-driven targeting systems performed under real combat conditions. Russian forces, seeking replacements for their dwindling Iranian Shahed fleet, accepted the offer. State-linked Chinese defense firms quietly funneled hundreds of civilian drone components to Russia. Yet, as Ukrainian intelligence and Western satellite imagery have now indicated, these components were clearly intended for military application. In recent weeks, Ukrainian reconnaissance units had been tracking unusual drone formations near the front lines. These new UAVs were described as larger, faster, and more coordinated than older Russian Orlan or Garan models, carrying Chinese-made optics, composite airframes, and encrypted communications modules. However, a critical factor was Ukraine's rapid technological adaptation. Kiev's electronic warfare units, fortified by NATO intelligence and field-tested counter-drone software, had reportedly learned to intercept and manipulate the very frequencies these drones relied upon. The operation was highly effective. Within a 48-hour period, Ukraine neutralized nearly 70% of the drones, incurring losses estimated at over $200 million. This represented one of the largest single drone attrition events of the war. Footage confirmed precision strikes on related infrastructure, including launch trucks, field hangars, and mobile control centers. Chinese officials had reportedly been uneasy for months as the unacknowledged alliance drew increasing scrutiny from Western intelligence. Since late summer, reports from Brussels and Washington noted a rise in dual-use exports, such as high-density lithium batteries and thermal imaging systems destined for Russia's Far East. This suggested a strategy of plausible deniability, maintaining public neutrality while covertly supplying Moscow. The collapse of this operation on Ukrainian soil challenged that ambiguity. Within hours, satellite images showed debris fields with components traceable to major Chinese suppliers, complete with serial codes that Western analysts quickly linked to state-approved export licenses. This tangible evidence of Beijing's involvement triggered a chain reaction. The European Union's Foreign Policy Council called an emergency session, while Washington's Department of Commerce reportedly began drafting new sanctions targeting the Chinese firms involved. The timing was problematic for both Moscow and Beijing. Russia, strained by losses and sanctions, hoped Chinese drone technology would fill the void left by Western export bans. China, conversely, was walking a diplomatic tightrope, balancing its role as a potential peace broker with quietly testing Western tolerance. This incident disrupted that act, forcing Beijing to choose between increasing covert aid or protecting its global economic interests. Ukrainian officials quickly highlighted the strike's importance. Mikhailo Podolyak, an advisor to President Zelensky, called it a technological victory over two authoritarian regimes at once. He noted this success proved that innovation and agility could overcome brute industrial capacity, stating, "They thought scale would win the war, but precision and intelligence prevail." Indeed, the deeper implications stretch far beyond the front lines. The failure of the Russia-China drone partnership exposes the vulnerabilities of authoritarian coordination under pressure. For years, Moscow and Beijing portrayed their cooperation as a symbol of resilience, but in practice, the relationship appeared far more transactional. Chinese defense insiders, speaking anonymously, admitted the failure was a wake-up call. They cited two key miscalculations: underestimating Ukraine's electronic warfare capabilities and overestimating Russia's ability to protect its logistical supply chains. For Russia, the consequences are severe. The Kremlin's reliance on imported drone technology is well known, but the exposure of Chinese involvement threatens to isolate Moscow further. Analysts suggest this breakdown could force Russia to revert to Iranian suppliers, a move that would degrade its air capabilities and complicate its diplomatic standing. As dawn broke, what remained of the drone fleet was twisted metal. The $1.6 billion alliance had crumbled, exposing the fragility of the Moscow-Beijing partnership. As the dust settled, global reverberations spread. Major intelligence agencies in Washington, London, and Brussels confirmed China's significant involvement in Russia's drone warfare. Evidence from the wreckage, including telemetry modules and encrypted data chips, pointed directly to supply chains linked to Chinese defense contractors. The diplomatic fallout was immediate. European Union leaders, who had been debating tighter export restrictions, now had clear proof of Beijing's complicity. Several EU states called for emergency sanctions on the companies responsible, threatening a new economic confrontation. At the same time, NATO praised Ukraine's operational precision, emphasizing the power of advanced counter-drone coordination and shared intelligence. For Ukraine, this was both a military and diplomatic success. Kyiv's partners, frustrated by Beijing's ambiguous stance, now had a tangible reason to confront China's duplicity. President Volodymyr Zelensky's administration moved swiftly to capitalize on this, sharing classified imagery with Western allies. "Transparency is our weapon," declared Ukraine's foreign minister Dmytro Kuleba. Russia may have found partners in aggression, but Ukraine has allies in truth. Inside China, the reaction was muted. State media maintained silence, while analysts within strategic research institutes assessed the damage. The failed venture was an embarrassment, exposing Beijing's covert involvement and revealing technical weaknesses in its drone systems under combat pressure. For a country positioning itself as a global leader in unmanned technology, this was an unexpected setback. What began as a test for advanced flight control algorithms and targeting software had turned into a technological problem. Reports from Ukrainian intelligence suggested several captured drones malfunctioned mid-flight due to jamming, with AI modules failing to adapt to Ukraine's electromagnetic countermeasures. This exposed developmental flaws to the international market. Moscow, meanwhile, faced an atmosphere of recrimination. Inside the Kremlin, frustration grew as commanders demanded explanations for the collapse of an alliance touted as a game-changer. Sources indicated President Putin's inner circle was displeased with both the Chinese suppliers and Russia's own intelligence units, which had failed to anticipate Ukraine's electronic warfare upgrades. The $1.6 billion investment had vanished. In response, Russian state television attempted to control the narrative, claiming the destroyed drones were prototypes and downplaying China's role. However, this version unraveled as Ukrainian media broadcast clear footage of Chinese serial numbers and manufacturer labels from the wreckage. Within China's foreign ministry, quiet concern set in. Diplomatic cables indicated Chinese officials urgently contacted Moscow, urging restraint in public statements and proposing a halt to further joint drone projects until security and discretion could be re-established. This suggested Beijing wanted to distance itself, at least temporarily, as the political cost began to outweigh the strategic benefit. Western policymakers acted quickly. The US State Department met with European allies to plan coordinated sanctions with the strategic goal of severing future covert technology channels. American officials called this a turning point in the gray zone cooperation between authoritarian states. Symbolically, this was a significant shift. The much-promoted Beijing-Moscow partnership was revealed as fragile. The incident highlighted a key asymmetry: Russia's dependence on Chinese technology versus China's readiness to retreat when its own interests were at risk. In Asia, the repercussions rippled outward. Japan and South Korea began reviewing their own drone defense policies. Tokyo announced plans to expand its electronic warfare units, while Seoul accelerated talks with NATO on sharing counter-drone intelligence. Taiwan, meanwhile, saw the event as validation of its own strategy to counter Chinese UAV incursions, proof that Beijing's unmanned systems were not invincible. Back in Europe, the narrative of Ukraine's victory grew. The destruction of the drone alliance was framed as symbolic of the broader unraveling of Russia's alliances. First, Iran's drones had faltered. Now, China's technology had failed. In both cases, Ukraine had demonstrated that resilience, innovation, and Western-backed intelligence could neutralize advanced enemy systems. Economically, consequences mounted for China. Several Western corporations, wary of secondary sanctions, suspended partnerships with Chinese tech firms suspected of aiding Russia. Beijing's image as a neutral player was eroding. Strategically, the loss forced Beijing into a re-evaluation. The exposure jeopardized its ambitions in the defense technology export market, as developing nations began reconsidering purchases. In Russia, the morale blow was profound. Troops on the front lines, who had hoped for the new drones, were left disillusioned. Reports surfaced of Russian units resorting again to modified commercial drones. Ukraine, on the other hand, emerged with renewed confidence, reinforcing its narrative of ingenuity. In Kyiv, military strategists hailed the strike as evidence of sophisticated integration with Western intelligence, and discussions reportedly began on how to leverage the captured technology. By the end of the week, the geopolitical scorecard was clear. Russia had lost a key technological lifeline. China had lost credibility. Ukraine had gained momentum, intelligence, and international support. The $1.6 billion drone alliance had collapsed into a symbol of overreach and miscalculation. In the days following, the geopolitical balance shifted. The collapse was more than a battlefield loss. It was the unmasking of the illusion of Moscow-Beijing unity. By the following week, Western intelligence assessments painted a clearer picture. Chinese firms had been funneling advanced drone components through intermediary countries, like Kazakhstan and Belarus, to disguise the true origin. Russian engineers then assembled these parts in covert facilities. Ukraine's defense industry, supported by Western partners, had quietly evolved into a laboratory of innovation. It combined NATO intelligence, homegrown software, and battlefield experience. The interception was the culmination of months of collaboration. Minister of Digital Transformation Mikhailo Fedorov remarked, "Ukraine is not just defending, it is redefining warfare." That sentiment resonated as analysts began to describe Ukraine as a combat innovator, whose adaptability was setting new military doctrines. For Russia and China, the aftershocks were severe. Inside the Kremlin, frustration mounted as another foreign partnership disintegrated, leaving Moscow increasingly isolated. China, meanwhile, navigated an international backlash. The United States and the European Union jointly imposed sanctions on several Chinese tech conglomerates, causing ripple effects as Western investors pulled back. Chinese diplomats scrambled to contain the damage. In an official statement, Beijing reiterated its commitment to peace and neutrality, denying it had supplied lethal weapons. Yet few were convinced. Within China, the failure also ignited rare internal criticism, with military analysts privately admitting the exposure jeopardized years of careful diplomacy. Ukraine's victory marked a transformation in its global image. Kyiv was no longer perceived merely as a nation under siege. It had become an emerging defense innovator. Several NATO members, including Poland, the United Kingdom, and Estonia, announced plans to collaborate with Ukrainian tech firms. On the ground, Ukrainian morale soared, with drone operators speaking of the satisfaction in watching enemy UAVs fall from the sky. The psychological blow to Russia's forces was equally significant. Without reliable drone reconnaissance, their artillery became less effective, and their troop movements more exposed. Ukrainian commanders quickly exploited this weakness. On the global stage, the myth of an unshakable Russia-China partnership began to erode. While publicly affirming their strategic friendship, behind the scenes, their trust was fraying. President Zelensky seized the moment to rally additional international support, framing the incident as proof that Russia's war machine depended on foreign enablers. "Every drone we destroy weakens not just Moscow's hands," Zelensky said, "but also those who pretend neutrality while fueling aggression." His words resonated in European capitals, resulting in a renewed push within the EU to tighten monitoring of dual-use exports. In the final analysis, the episode encapsulated a deeper truth about modern conflict. War is no longer won solely by firepower or scale, but by adaptability, intelligence, and the will to innovate under pressure. Ukraine had mastered that balance. For Russia and China, the lesson was harsh. Alliances built on ambition and secrecy, without trust or precision, inevitably crumble.